the second half of Chapter 4 to Main Hughes Principles of Macroeconomics. All right, now we're talking about supply and the behavior of our sellers. So quantity supplied is the amount that they're willing and able to sell at each price. We're going to look at it in terms of different prices. So you can see that there's a positive or direct relationship between the quantity supplied of a good and the price now. As one goes up, more will increase. Now, suppliers, I don't think any of you all would have argued with somebody wanting to pay you $20 for your truck, right? How many of y'all would have been happy with that? All right. If I went down to $10, how many of y'all were willing and able to sell at $10? Okay, just a few of us. Keep your hands up. 10, 30, 10, 50. $10. 10. Okay. So the more, and then if I said $50 or $100, all of your hands would definitely be up. So we see this positive relationship with the price of the good and the quantity supplied. So more and more of you were willing and able to supply at higher prices, and that just represents the law of supply. Now, just like demand, same definitions here. The schedule is just the table of data that we're using to create the supply curve. It's just what we call it. It doesn't have to have a curved shape to it. A straight line is okay for this class. So here we've got our schedule in the corner, our price and quantity supplied information. And what we're doing is just graphing it on our, plotting these points on our graph here. So this is at $1, we've got one that our seller is willing and able to sell. At $1.50, we've got 2 ice cream cones, and then so on and so forth until we've got all of our data points. And when you connect the dots, there's your supply curve. Remember, this is price per unit, and this is total down here. So when we're saying that when ice cream cones are $1.50, they're sold at $1.50, there's a total of 2 ice cream cones that sellers are willing and able to sell.
So is the supply always going to go to the right, and the
yes.
demand is always going to go to the left? Is that a normal?
Demand is always going to be downward sloping to the right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then supply is always going to be upward sloping to the right. Yeah. Yes, and that's because of the law of demand and law of supply. They'll always look like that. In this class, at least. In microeconomics, you look at some with different slopes. Okay, market supply, just like market demand, we're talking about several different firms together. We've added up their willingness and ability to sell at different prices, up for many firms instead of just one firm. Remember that a change in quantity supplied is just caused by a change in the price of the product. That's a movement along the curve. For example, if there has been a tax on our ice cream cone, let's say that it was $1 before. Now with a $2 tax, it's $3. We're moving from point A to point B. Point A to point C.
You said that whenever it's quantity demanded or supplied, that's when it's just moving, because of price, right?
Yes.
And then when it shifts to the right or to the left, that's when it's the determinants.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. It's caused by the determinants, and the terminology for that is a change in demand, or in this case with supply, change in supply.
And that's when it moves to the right or to the left.
Yes, and a complete shift. Okay. All right. So this is an example of a change in quantity supplied caused by a change in the price of the product itself. But if something, just like you were saying, a determinant, that means something that's going to actually shift the whole thing, changes, and that is something other than price, it's going to shift the whole supply curve. And it can be caused by several things. Input prices. Okay, think of this as ingredients or supplies that you need to make your product. So So if there's a cotton shortage, what's going to happen to the prices of t-shirts? I'm sorry, what's going to happen to the supply of t-shirts if there is a cotton shortage? It'll go down, and that's represented by a leftward shift or rightward shift? Left, getting closer to zero. Input prices. What if there's better technology? That'll shift supply to the right. Good. Expectations. What if you're a backpack manufacturer and you're expecting, from July to August, people are going to be getting ready for school, next school year? Are you going to be producing more or less? Okay, producing more, and that would shift supply to the right. How many people use an electric provider other than TXU? Other than TXU. Okay, what are some of those companies? Just call them out. Direct. StarTex.
What was the question?
Green Mountain.
For those of us who use an electricity provider other than TXU. Okay, well, a few years ago, when I asked this question, all of us in this room would have said TXU. And after deregulation, we've got all sorts of different companies that you can pick from. You can go online to Power to Choose and compare rates there. So when we have a whole bunch more companies that can provide electricity, that's an example of the number of sellers increasing or shifting supply out to the right. Okay, so prices isn't on this list. Price of the product itself. Now, if it's the price of an ingredient or a raw material, that can impact supply. Okay, so remember, supply goes up. It's upward sloping, that's what I mean. And when it increases, just like with demand, think rightward and leftward shifts. So this is an increase in supply, and that's a decrease in supply. And when you say that supply is going up, you really mean that it's increasing. Don't try to shift supply from here to up here somewhere, because that's going to end up being a decrease, and students get mixed up on that. Think of rightward and leftward shifts. Okay, well, supply and demand, we've talked about them separately, but they're most useful when we put them together. Then we can make predictions about the new equilibrium. So supply and demand together, right where they cross, remember when I showed you that red and blue line and told you where do they meet? That's equilibrium. This seems really obvious right now, but we're going to look at situations where it's not the case, where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. It's really obvious because you think it was right where they cross, right? But we're going to look at when that is not the case, when they actually don't cross. It's really easy to find on a graph because it's right where supply and demand intersect with one another. And you'll have to remember how to label your supply and demand graph. Price per unit always goes over here on the vertical axis. Quantity, this is total quantity, always goes down here on the horizontal axis. Just draw a big X after you draw your axes. Remember, this is supply, and it goes up. This one goes down, and that one's demand. And there's equilibrium right where they meet. You've got to remember where these labels go. If you get supply and demand mixed up, and then start shifting around these curves, you're going to get all the questions that I asked you, backwards. So make sure that you at least have all your labels correct for supply and demand. When I first took economics, I would always draw my axes and make a big X, and then I came up with a little saying to remind myself where all the labels went. I thought, please, Sally, don't quit. And that helped me remember where all the So maybe that'll help you too. Okay, so for this graph over here, we're still talking about ice cream cones. By the way, when we were talking about production possibility curves, remember that was two products, Snickers and Starburst, computers and cars, right? We were talking about production. In this chapter, we are talking about only one product, the supply and demand of one item. We are talking about ice cream cones here. If we were talking about ice cream, we would draw a completely different graph for ice cream. If we're talking about Coke, it gets its own graph. Pepsi, it gets its own graph. So this is just one item that we're talking about, supply and demand of one item. Okay, at this equilibrium, I told you it's really easy to find it. It's right where they intersect. If I ask you, at the equilibrium, or what's the equilibrium quantity? You find where they intersect, and you go straight down to the quantity axis. So in this case, it is 7 ice cream cones. If I ask you about the equilibrium price, you find the equilibrium, and you go straight across to the price axis. That's $2. The equilibrium price is $2. The equilibrium quantity is 7. Everybody see how to do that? Okay. We're going to start out again with equilibriums of 7 and at $2, an increase in demand. Okay, why would people want more ice cream cones? Maybe they have more money. Maybe we have more people who are in town and want to buy it. Maybe it's 100 degrees outside and everybody wants one. Okay, all of these things don't deal with the price. It's not on sale. It's people want more of ice cream cones at every price. So, increase in demand is going to shift which way? To the right. Where's our new equilibrium going to be? Where the old supply meets the new demand, right there. Okay, before I click through, is the new quantity going to be higher? Is it going to increase or decrease?
Increase.
Okay, here's 0, here's 7. It's going to be about 10, right? It's going to increase. Okay, before I click through, and you can see at the new equilibrium, is this going to be higher or lower than the original price? Higher. So just like you did with the initial equilibrium, you find where they intersect, and then whatever I'm asking you about, whether it's price, if I'm asking you about price, you go over here. If I'm asking you about quantity, you're just going to go straight down. So what can we say? If hot weather increases the demand for ice cream, more ice cream is going to be sold at higher prices. That's what we can say. Okay, you try one now with a decrease in demand. Just on a scratch sheet of paper off in the margin, show a decrease in demand. Let's see if that looks like mine. Okay, here's our first equilibrium, right? A decrease in demand makes it shift to the left, so you could have used a different color, or you could have used a dotted line. We're going to call this demand 1, demand 2. Here's our new equilibrium. First equilibrium, new equilibrium. Here's our original price, original quantity, new price, and new quantity. Okay, what happened to the price? The new equilibrium. Lower. If it helps you to put numbers here, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, what happened to quantity?
Decrease.
Also decreased. And if it helps to put some numbers there, that's fine. Everybody got a graph that looked like this? Okay, here's an example. This is terrible, but just a few years ago, had some strollers and some babies got tangled up and were strangled. And so they discontinued this. And so you can see this is a really unfortunate example of when the demand for a product would definitely decrease. Let's take a look at another example. A decrease in supply. Okay, we're going to start out with our equilibrium. In this case, our example of the book is there's a sugar shortage. And so ice cream makers, remember our ceteris paribus, keeping everything else the same. Their budget for all their supplies is the same. If sugar all of a sudden gets super expensive because there's a shortage, if you, as an ice cream maker, are you going to make more or less? Are you going to be able to make more, the same, or less? Less. And so that is a leftward shift of supply. There's our new equilibrium. And before I click through, what's going to happen to the new equilibrium price? It's going to go up because here's the new equilibrium. If I ask you about price, you go over to the price axis. It's going to be more than $2. Okay, what's going to happen to the new equilibrium quantity? It's going to go down. Here's our new equilibrium. You're going to go down to the quantity axis, getting closer to 0. That's how you do that. All right. You try, just right underneath your paper, you try an increase in supply. Show an increase in supply. Let's see if it looks like mine. You can use abbreviations. You can say S and D if you didn't want to write out supply and demand, as long as you know what it means. Show an increase in supply. Curve. It's going to look like that. There's our second equilibrium. Okay, what happened to prices? Here's our first price. Here's our second price. Decreased. First quantity and second quantity. If here's 0, what happened? Increased. Quantity increase. So what does this mean? When the supply of a product increases, more is going to be sold at cheaper prices. And that's why we deregulated the electricity market. And here's another just quick example. I posted this on my blog. Sock making. These companies are racing to produce the best, mass produce the best sock. And people who hike a lot, get a lot of blisters and stuff just from regular socks, but they swear by these really, really, really good high technology socks, and I can't find it in here, but some consumer was bragging that they could wear it for a certain number of days and hike a certain number of miles without washing it, and it still smelled the same. So they're bragging that it protects their feet, and that's just, your feet sweat a lot. So. But they're willing to pay up to $30 for a pair. So if they can find a really good product, make a way to make a good product, and keep producing more and more of them, then maybe they'll see a lower price, as predicted by our graph that we just did together. Okay. These next slides, this isn't entirely true, but for today, I want you to just kind of draw a line in your mind. How to find equilibrium and how to find the new equilibrium. So everybody's okay with manipulating those graphs? All right. We're going to look at when we are not at equilibrium now. They're actually related, but just for today, think of them as separate. We just looked at finding a new equilibrium. Now we're going to look at when it's not at equilibrium. All right. Surplus. That means we have too much stuff, right? You might have visited the Army surplus store here in town. It's when we've got extra stuff that we need to sell. So when the price of a product is greater than the equilibrium price, what would have been the equilibrium price, then we can say that the quantity that sellers want to sell is greater or exceeds what buyers want to buy at that price. And there's going to be leftover. Let's take a look at this on the graph. Equilibrium market clearing price is $2. So, if our ice cream makers decided to try to sell at $2.50. Okay, again, sellers in here, I didn't hear anybody argue when somebody wanted to pay more for your product. So when the price increases, the willingness and ability of our sellers to provide a product, that quantity supplied increases, right? They're happier with higher prices. Okay, what about consumers? Not so happy about higher prices, right? At $2.50, let's see where it hits demand. Along the demand curve, at $2 it was $7. At $2.50, it's going to be way less. At higher prices, consumers are willing and able to buy less than before. See, that number is 4 on this graph. So what's going on? At $2.50, does the market clear? Let's just take a look at this line here. Do supply and demand ever cross? No, there is this mismatch, right? And what do we call it? When supply is way over here and demand's way over here? A surplus. A surplus of how many units? 6. Good. On the quiz tomorrow and on the test, when I ask you at the price of $2.50, how much of a surplus is there? You're going to look at these two numbers. You're going to ignore the 7 because the 7 corresponds with the market clearing price of 2. The question's asking about $2.50, you ignore this. And you're just looking at that 4 and that 10. Okay, shortage is just the opposite when the price is too low. When it is less than the equilibrium price, we've got excess demand. I don't know if you all remember this, but a couple of years ago, HP was selling a touchpad tablet. It was $3.99. I'll show you. It was $3.99. And it was just for a day or so that they lowered it to $99. Does anybody remember this? My dad works for HP, and he said that day nobody was doing their work. They were just online trying to get this touchpad. And I know a lot of my friends were super excited because they got a $99 touchpad a few years ago. So equilibrium price was $3.99. Now it was $99. Okay, can y'all guess what happened in a couple hours? Okay, completely sold out. A lot of people upset that they didn't get one. So when we have price, it's lower than the equilibrium price. Graphically, what does that look like? Well, in our case, with ice cream cones at $1.50, let's see. So where it hits supply, it's over here. Where does it hit demand? Way over here. We've got a higher quantity demanded than quantity supplied. We've got a shortage. And in this case of 6 units, I know it's the same numbers as last time, but you're going to ignore that 7 when you answer the question of how many units of a shortage. So when the company keeps running out of something, that means the price is too low and that customers are willing and able to buy more. Now, what could they do? Raise the price to get back to equilibrium. And if we have a surplus, what does Walmart do when they have a bunch of stuff on the shelves that nobody wants? Okay, they lower the price. And so with a surplus, we'll come back over here, there's going to be downward pressure on the price to get closer to equilibrium. All right, let's try. That's the end of Chapter 4 notes. I think you have all the text for the rest of the summary slides.